Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show, brought to you by the world famous FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, and I am coming to you live from the Pacific Northwest, the West Coast. 9:30 at night. I know it's after midnight for those of you watching me live. I appreciate it. Or if you're watching on demand, continued support as we go through the off-season college football series. We've talked about transfers. We've talked about top 25 rankings. We've talked about lesser known teams in smaller conferences. We've talked about the Pac-12. We've talked about the Big 12. We've talked about the SEC. All these conferences, the Big Ten, and we're now going to finish up the off-season previews with the ACC and talking about projected depth charts and any other relevant stuff for the ACC. Now, we are a mere 24 days away from week 0 of the 2023 college football season. That's Saturday, August 26th, 10 Division I games scheduled for week 0. We'll be able to place bets. We'll be able to do some prize pick stuff. We'll be able to do DFS, Slate 1. It is absolutely fantastic. You can't even fathom it, really. There's just so little time left for the season to begin. I'm absolutely super hyped. Of course, the week prior, we will be breaking down the week 0 slate in full, talking to you about, game by game stuff, our core plays, any sneaks, doing what we do. Now, looking at that slate, talk a little bit about it here. It's an all-day affair. Navy at Notre Dame. Interesting. UTEP at Jacksonville State. Okay. UMass at New Mexico State. All right. Ohio, your Ohio Bobcats against San Diego State. That could be intriguing. Hawaii at Vanderbilt. I like it. San Jose State at USC. That's going to be a fantastic and a fun one for sure. And then we finish it up with Florida International at Louisiana Tech. So some definitively intriguing games there for week 0 and some teams that people just aren't going to know anything about. So you can rest assured that the edge that FTN Network possesses will be out and about. We'll be covering the news. We'll be doing the breaking news stuff and final thoughts Saturday morning before the slate. And then overall, just, doing our thing in the Discord. So you want to make sure that you're signing up with the FTN Network. If you haven't already done so, you certainly want to give that a look. There's lots of stuff going on. NFL preseason starting, the Hall of Fame game tomorrow/today, depending on when you're watching this. I just put out on the FTN Network a do's and don'ts of preseason NFL DFS over there on ftndaily.com. Check that one out. It's free. I'll tweet that out later after the show. And then I'll be covering tomorrow the Hall of Fame game. And then it's just boom, right into the preseason. We'll be, talking about our edge there with the news and really just takes us into week 0 of the college football season. WNBA still ripping and running. We'll be, finishing that up over the next month and a half. And then before you know it, if you follow John Rothstein, college basketball is getting closer and closer to being under the 100-day mark. It's insane. We had our break. I'm ready to go. I don't need sleep. I don't know about you guys, but I am ready and just, ready to grind this out with you. Now, still in the midst, you've been watching me all summer, moving from my dining room to the garage. I got my banners up. Next up are going to be shelves. Before next week's show, we're going to have some shelves up. It is actually my birthday, August 2nd, born in the year 1985, getting quite old. So we celebrated over the weekend. I had to work all day and then, of course, doing the show on my birthday. So, no days off for me. One of the birthday gifts and what I'm excited to display on my shelves when they're up is actually a cause figure. I don't know how much of you are familiar with the filleted cause, but I'm into a little bit of that hype beast stuff. I'm going to be getting some bear bricks, and I've got another cause figure on the way. So thanks to the family for providing me with this cool birthday gift cause figure, the filleted cause. That'll be up behind me on the shelves there. Got some other cool stuff. Keeping an eye on it. Maybe we'll have to have the cause play of the day or something. I just don't know. I'll put him over here and he can keep an eye on me and supervise me as I go. All right. So we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about all the ACC teams, give our thoughts and any relevant stuff there, and just kind of just go team by team and list those depth charts. I feel like this has been a very beneficial thing and really gives us the names we need to know and any secret plays that we want to think of as well. Make sure that you have notifications on as we head into week 0 for my account on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it now, at DubDeuces85. And especially in the Discord, the CFB Discord is going to be just absolutely popping. We miss no news frequently when there's late scratches or surprise starters. We're getting that news, and you're seeing guys who are scratched with 10, 15, sometimes 25% rostership. So please make sure you're checking out FTN Daily and giving us a shot to help you win money. And the niche thing is what I do, and I really, really appreciate everybody who's stuck with me over the years. It's going to be a really big college football season, the best yet. I have a lot of confidence in our ability this year to help you win money between myself, Jake Kuchek, and the entire team at FTN Bets that's covering college football this year as well. All right, let's get into it. We're going to start things off with the let's see, pull it up here, the Clemson Tigers. We're going to start off with them. Clemson, they having some changes here, right? With DJ, our guy, he's over at Oregon State now. Now it's time for Cade Klubnik to really, show what he's made of here. Sophomore season, really step into the limelight and become not only a fantastic fantasy option for us, but somebody that the Clemson Tigers can rally around and really start to, win games and become a real threat again. They also bring in Paul Tyson as a grad transfer from ASU in Alabama. Don't anticipate him playing much, but he's there if something happens. But Cade Klubnik is definitely the guy who will be running this offense. Running backs are strong. Will Shipley, Phil Mafah, those guys both return. Will Shipley is definitely going to be a guy that is, going to get a ton of carries. Now, last season, he put up some solid numbers, but at times he wasn't really worth the salary that his price ballooned up to. But for the most part, he did perform at a pretty high level with Kobe Pace, kind of dropping out there. Shipley did rush for 1,100, almost 1,200 yards. Mafah had 515. Really has a lot of value as a pass catcher, 38 catches, 250 yards the last season. I'm expecting a much bigger season. I think Shipley could take, this closer to maybe 1,500 yards and have a much higher ceiling than we've seen before. He has had games where he's broken the slate in, times. What I'm expecting from him this time is to be slightly underpriced coming into the season and then balloon into maybe a 9K running back that we have to seriously consider using. So I'm feeling pretty damn good about him. The wide receiver spot, it was a little bit erratic. There's nobody we could really count on. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that DJ Uiagalelei, he relied heavily on his ability to run. He rushed for over 500 yards last year, completed about 62% of his passes, 22 touchdowns. It was a much better season for him than I think a lot of people expected. But with Klubnik, this is going to be able to take the next step. And you're looking at these receivers here, projected Adam Randall, who's a sophomore, Bo Collins, who we're plenty familiar with at this point, and Antonio Williams in the slot. Those are your three main guys. At the tight end spot, Jake Brenningstool, Sage Ennis, and Josh Sapp. Looking at it, the top returners, at least from a receiving standpoint, Antonio Williams, 56 catches, 600 yards, 4 touchdowns, and Gada's gone off to the NFL after catching 41 passes for 500 yards. Bo Collins, 22 catches, 373 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Brenningstool as a tight end, 25, 285, and 4. He certainly has some touchdown equity in this offense and will be intriguing. And then Adam Randall, 10 catches, 128 yards. We'll be looking to see what kind of sneak he can provide as the season goes on. That's pretty much it for Clemson. When you look at Klubnik, he did, have some solid performances in small spurts. Did throw for almost 700 yards in parts of 10 games, a couple of touchdowns, did get picked off 3 times, but he did show us something in a full off season. I think we're going to see Clemson kind of return to their glory days a little bit. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I do think we're going to see them play a lot better. The Florida State Seminoles, let's move right along to them. All right. This is a very intriguing offense. They're getting a ton of hype. Trey Benson is being atop multiple lists of, watch lists for running back spot. The Florida State Seminoles as a whole, top 10 offense as it was. They're bringing back a ton of pieces at quarterback. The somewhat over the years frustrating Jordan Travis returns, and now he is a key DFS / fantasy option that I think we're going to definitely be able to rely on more often than not. I love Jordan Travis. I think he's going to be a top-notch quarterback. At running back, Trey Benson, he doesn't have to share the backfield touches quite as much. When you look at last year, let's pull that up. There was a lot of, mouths to feed in that running game. Not only do you have Jordan Travis rushing for a ton of yards, over 400, 7 touchdowns, known for that, 80 plus carries, but you had Lawrence Toafeli, you had Treshaun Ward, you've got Trey Benson. All 3 of those guys rushed for 450 plus yards, with Trey Benson almost hitting 1,000 yards, with all those guys receiving 90 plus touches. So now you take a lot of that away, and Trey Benson is looking like a bona fide bell cow running back. Now he's still going to have Lawrence Toafeli there, and Toafeli's still going to get his share of carries. There's a 500-yard season there brewing for Toafeli, and plenty of touchdowns to boot. 4 to 6 at minimum. But I think Benson, you take out the Treshaun Ward carries, which was 95 for 628 and 7 touchdowns. Wasn't much of a pass catcher. Toafeli, actually the best, statistically speaking, pass catching running back on the Seminoles team. You have a situation where Benson's going to absorb a lot of those carries from Ward, and Toafeli's just going to continue to do his thing and still provide us with some strong receiving numbers and possibly be a really cheap option moving into that RB2 role. So Toafeli still got value, but Trey Benson, as you can see, is getting a lot of the hype surrounding FSU running backs. Everybody's fawning all over him. Now they do bring in our boy from South Carolina to play tight end, Jaheim Bell. I, of course, love Jaheim Bell. I love the way that they used him in running situations last year for South Carolina. Of course, they were really in need of offensive weapons and any offensive generation at all possible. Now, Bell caught 73 carries for 261 yards, caught 25 passes for 231 yards, scored a total of 5 touchdowns, 3 rushing, 2 receiving. Now, the year prior, he caught 30 passes for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. Receiving numbers went down. South Carolina, we talked about it in the SEC show. They had, poor play. Rattler definitely stepped it up as time went on, and they used Bell a lot more in the running game and kind of turned him into mostly a fullback as opposed to a pass-catching tight end. I think we see him get back to business here for Florida State and really resume that role where we're going to see him probably be somewhere between, at minimum, 35 to 50 catches with 500 plus yards and, 5 to 6 touchdowns, something like that. I'm pretty big fan. I'm a big believer in Jaheim Bell. And as much as I like the fact that he was getting carries, they don't need him to do that. They may use him. They may borrow some of that and have him, at the goal line, take a few carries. But the fact of the matter is, this team is so elite at running the football, they don't really need to put Bell in that way. They can use Benson. They have Toafeli. They have Travis. So Bell can just be that pass catcher and not be so one-dimensional, because if you got Bell in the game and you put him in there in the backfield, the defense knows what's coming. They're going to cheat. You really need to use him for more of what he is, and that's a pass-catching tight end. So I'm excited about the fact that he's there and going to certainly do some damage in this offense. Johnny Wilson returns, primary pass catcher, 897 yards last year, 43 catches, 5 touchdowns, definitely a versatile weapon and somebody who could potentially put up a 1,000-yard season, because I do believe this offense is going to be even more dynamic than it was last year, if you can believe that. Additionally, Keon Coleman comes in. Keon Coleman is my Dude, I am a huge Keon Coleman fan. He was somebody I used a ton of last year while he was at Michigan State. I'm ready for him to just absolutely explode. If there's anything keeping Johnny Wilson from putting up a 1,000-yard season, it would be Keon Coleman. Now, when you look at last year's stats for Florida State receivers, after Wilson's 900, Ontario Wilson, 30 catches, 500 yards. Michael Pittman, 32 catches, 330 yards. Cameron McDonald, 21 catches, 312 yards, and Kentron Poitier, 14 catches, 283 yards. And then you have a bunch of Toa Philly, Marcuston Douglas, 14 catches, Malik McClain, 17 catches, Ja'Kai Douglas, 10. A lot of just, minimal production from the rest of the field. Keon Coleman is a bona fide stud. Now, the defenses in the ACC, some of them will be top-notch, but that, knock them down physicality that the Big Ten has, you're not going to necessarily see that on a regular basis in the ACC. And you're looking at Keon Coleman. He turned in a third-team all Big Ten season with the Spartans last season, catching 58 passes, just a tick under 800 yards, 7 touchdowns. He was phenomenal in the game against Washington. That's when he really came onto the map. I am a big fan of his. Total receptions, ranked 8th in the conference, ranked 4th in the Big Ten with 15 catches of at least 20 yards, 155 yards on 5-catch game in his career last year. You know what? He is a big-time game breaker, and he's going to be fun. This offense gains another, weapon and adds to its versatility, and they're not going to be so one-dimensional at times with running the football. And a guy like Keon Coleman comes in and will allow them to really stretch the field and make it that much easier for an already deadly running game. So needless to say, I'm all the way in on Keon Coleman. And then you've got guys like Winston Wright, Ja'Kai Douglas, operating out of the slot likely. So the offense, it looks good. I am super, super excited for this Florida State team, more so than I think I've been ever for them. Generally speaking, I haven't been as high on the field on a guy like Jordan Travis, but the fact of the matter is he has a myriad of weapons. They have some freshman receivers coming in that look like they're going to be very solid. Deuce Span's still floating around there. Kentron Poitier, who you write him off either. It just looks like a really solid group and one that's going to do some real damage. Defensively, they're going to be fairly good as well. So I like this Florida State team. I think that we're definitely going to be talking about using them with regularity. All right, moving right along, we're going to move into the North Carolina Tar Heels, that versatile, fun offense that we saw. Now, North Carolina, they definitely churned out some big-time DFS stats, some high points. Drake May, absolute monster at times, however, disappeared at other times. You look at it, 66% of his passes completed, 4,300 yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Very consistent options. It was very rare for him to not produce, but his price became so ballooned that if he didn't have the 350-yard multiple touchdown, 100 rushing yard game, you came away disappointed. He did rush for 700 yards and 7 touchdowns, which was absolutely insane. When you look at the North Carolina running back group last year, Elijah Green, Omarion Hampton, Caleb Hood, George Pettaway, somebody I like, DJ Jones. I mean, there is just so many guys getting carries, and then your quarterback comes away the leading rusher. Elijah Green, 558 yards, Hampton, 401, Caleb Hood, 250, DJ Jones, 124, and Pettaway, 93. Now, what this did is it created a situation where if you used a North Carolina running back in your main lineup, number one, you had balls of steel, yes, but number two, you probably came away with a losing lineup more often than not and just really didn't, feel very good about yourself at the end. And a lot of times those North Carolina running backs were so cheap, you couldn't help but feel like you had to take a shot at them. Now, with Drake May, he's absolutely going to be a QB1, guy that you can use. You have the salary, you can plug him in there. He's obviously going to continue to have a monstrous season and somebody that we can count on. Where it gets tricky is when you start looking at this group and all of those guys back, and then you throw British Brooks back into the mix, you're really looking at Elijah Green, Hampton, Brooks, Hood, and Pettaway minus DJ Jones, putting Brooks back in after the injury. You have a group here that's going to continue to cannibalize each other for carries, and then you're going to have that quarterback in May stealing touchdowns, stealing carries, stealing yardage. It's going to be really, really tough to trust. You can use some of these guys in those large field GPP lineups, and especially the ones that are, pushing closer to min price, as opposed to maybe somebody has a big week. Let's say Omarion Hampton scores 3 touchdowns one week and DK Jackson's priced to $7K. You're pretty much foolish if you're going to play him that next week, because very easily he could be the one getting 5 carries for 4 yards this following week, and George Pettaway scores 2 touchdowns, or God forbid, Drake May, and you didn't roster him that week, scores 3 rushing touchdowns. That's a real thing that could absolutely happen. It's really tough to play. It's really tough. I mean, I personally, I think British Brooks could even turn in some RB1 carries at points this year. Caleb Hood, if he's fully healthy, I mean, this is really looking like a at minimum 3-headed group, and could balloon out to 5 guys who legitimately have to get touches. Right now, from what I read on various North Carolina, sites and message boards, Green and Hampton are the 2 guys that those fans and those beats seem to think will be the featured guys coming into the season. That very easily could flip after a couple of games. So as of right now, we might want to keep our focus on Hampton and Green for touches, but legitimately anything could happen. We could be waking up Saturday morning for a North Carolina game, and suddenly, Hampton's out, or Brooks has re-aggravated something, and George Pettaway is getting the first carries. But just because that whatever running back is getting those first carries doesn't mean anything. We saw it plenty of times last year with this group. Be prepared to be super frustrated anytime you roster a North Carolina running back. It is not going to be an easy thing to do on a week-to-week basis. Now, at the wide receiver spot, it's different. Josh Downs gone, and his 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, 94 catches. He kind of had that weird start, and then he turned in some really big games. But more often than not, I feel like Downs was over-rostered and underperformed when you look at salary to how much the field had him. I really like the way Antoine Green showed out last year, 800 yards on just 43 catches, 7 touchdowns. That was certainly pretty intriguing, the way he played. You look at the guys that they're going to have now, though, with over 1,100 yards of production gone. They had to turn to the transfer portal. Devontae Walker, Nate McCollum, both of those guys expected to play massive, massive roles. You don't just lose players like Josh Downs and Antoine Green without, having a little bit of some growing pains early on. But I think Walker and McCollum are experienced enough that they can definitely, fill those roles quickly and put up production for us quickly as well. Kobe Paysour, at this point, the top returner in terms of production with everybody who's gone, 29 catches, 324 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Somebody that we definitely want to look at, and somebody that I would expect to be relatively cheap early on, and his role should be going a lot higher than it was. Gavin Blackwell still floating around there, and Andre Green as well. If you don't know, let me pull this up here. Devontae Walker played in the MAC for Kent State, that vaunted video game-like offense that Kent State produced. Goes from a redshirt freshman season in which he caught 5 passes for 124 yards and a touchdown, to last season, which was his, true, redshirt sophomore season, 58 catches, 921 yards, and 11 touchdowns. They even gave him 3 carries and 29 yards and a touchdown. So is certainly my favorite for taking the Downs WR1 role, and they can use him in a myriad of ways. Another guy, though, that won't necessarily be needed to take carries, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit if they did try to get him the ball in a myriad of ways, and that possibly would be one of them. Not great for the running backs there either. Nate McCollum, transferring over from Georgia Tech, had a career best 60 catches, 655 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Also 6 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. So another receiver that got a little bit of carries. Won't be needed in North Carolina in that. Or key in early like Tez Walker. Tight end spot, Kamari Morales and Brian Nesbitt. This is a pretty good and I think underrated group of tight ends. John Copenhaver in there as well. Right now, from what I've looked at early depth chart projections, it is Bryson Nesbitt who sits there. Morales is somebody not to sleep on, though. He has been around for a minute, and he has produced some pretty solid stats on a game-to-game basis. Last year, 29 catches, 360 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Pretty solid production there. That's somebody that I would expect to kind of maybe be like a near min price, large field GPP look if you want a piece of this high flying and highly productive offense without breaking the bank. You also have Nesbitt sitting there who had caught 35 passes for 507 yards and 4 touchdowns. Will be using his tight ends, that's for sure. And both of those guys are going to be heavily involved. And then you look at Copenhaver last year, 15 catches for 202 yards. This offense is the truth. New faces with some returners. It's going to be really fun. On a game-to-game basis, it's all about targeting May or the pass catchers. Good luck if you want to venture out and try those running backs, because it's going to be a very difficult situation to get comfy with. All right, moving on to the Duke Blue Devils. This isn't basketball season yet. We don't dislike Duke football as much as we like Duke basketball. So looking at it, Riley Leonard back in the house. Riley Leonard was my guy. Now, I always feel ill when I roster Duke basketball players. It doesn't feel right. But when it comes to Duke football players, I kind of like doing it because no one else really does it. Usually over the last couple of years, people try to roster Duke running backs, right? Looks solid last year. But if you look at Riley Leonard, didn't get the same level of hype that Drake May did. But if you look at his stats, yes, he didn't have the passing numbers necessarily. He still completed 64% of his passes for 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. But rushing wise, he was right on par with May. 700 rushing yards, 13 rushing touchdowns on 124 attempts. Riley Leonard is I'm optimistic, let's put it that way, about his season, prospects. You look at it, they do return Jordan Waters, to be their RB1. Other runners, Jalen Coleman, who rushed for almost 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's there as well. And Jaquez Moore, another returner who rushed for over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. So they have a bit of a three-headed monster there at running back as well, and a talented freshman in Peyton Jones. Not that excited. We'll have to see how pricing works out for that running back group. I think that'll be another one where, yes, there'll be 1 week where one of those 3 goes off, and then the next week could be completely different. And I'd rather just go the route of taking Riley Leonard. I know he's going to be on par with those guys in terms of rushing touchdowns, and he's also going to give us that passing upside as well. And looking at it, there is a lot of continuity when it comes to his wide receivers. Looking at the wide receiver production, last season, the top 3, Jalen Calhoun, 873 yards, Jordan Moore, 656 yards, and Shamir Higgins, 400 yards. Then you had Eli Pankel, 347. Looking at the top 3 returners on the depth chart, top 4 really, all of those guys do return: Shamir Higgins, Jalen Calhoun, Eli Pankel, and Jordan Moore. So got that continuity there with those guys returning. Tight end, maybe a little bit hit or miss. Nikki Dalmolin, 21 catches, 170 yards, and 4 touchdowns, does return. Not anything to get super excited about there, but this Duke offense is certainly better on paper than I think people are probably going to give it credit for. Riley Leonard may have a fraction of the ownership from a week-to-week basis of somebody like a Drake May, even though he puts up fantasy points in bunches. And he will probably be under 7K. We got some really good production out of him last year at a cheap price. He eventually started going up in price, but man, having those Leonard lineups really put you atop the leaderboards and separated you from the rest of the field until people started to figure out, oh, holy crap, this could get in play. So that's the Duke Blue Devils. Moving right along here, we're going to talk about NC State. Now, what is NC State going to do? They've got transfers, they've got changes. I don't know. Can this football team get back to business? Can they put up some stats without Devin Leary, who goes off to Kentucky to run that offense, which I think is going to be extremely, extremely fun? Can they have a season to build and possibly win 10 games after going 8-5 a season ago? Certainly possible. They had the Ben Finley era there for a couple games. MJ Morris, Jack Chambers, when Devin Leary had to stop playing there with injuries, they really had a revolving door there of backups, and they just couldn't get over the hump. They won some games, but they just couldn't get there. Having Brennan Armstrong transfer in from Virginia, where I believe he'll be fully turned loose. The Virginia offense last year was so god-awful. They really handcuffed Brennan Armstrong and what he could do, and that Virginia offense had way too many weapons to be that horrible. We would stack 2 years ago, Virginia, Armstrong with a couple of his receivers, and we'd get a very good return on our investment there. Last season, that just wasn't the case, and Armstrong was so bad, and part of his fault, certainly, making bad reads, poor decisions with the football, couldn't get any room, but also the play calling was absolutely atrocious. You don't sit there and have Brennan Armstrong run these, third grade plays. He completes less than 60% of his passes for, really the first time in 3 years, 2,200 yards, 7 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Now you look at the year before when he had the pretty massive season, 4,500 passing yards, 65% completion percentage, 31 passing touchdowns to 10 interceptions. And he also rushed for 9 touchdowns, 251 yards. Hell, he even caught a pass that year. Now he did rush for more yardage last year, 371 yards, scored a little bit less, 6 touchdowns. But man, it got to a point where you couldn't even touch the Virginia offense. You certainly couldn't play Brennan Armstrong, even at a cheap price. There'd be a time where Brennan Armstrong would be priced at 6.5 or hell, even 7K, and it was like an auto play. It got to the point so bad last year that you couldn't even use him at all. Running game was atrocious. Paris Jones only rushed for 365 yards. Receiving wise, you're looking at a group that had Keaton Thompson, who I absolutely love, Dontavian Wicks, Lavelle Davis, Billy Kemp, all of these weapons, and none of them got above 600 yards. Keaton Thompson somehow had 0 receiving touchdowns last year. Dontavian Wicks had only 2. Billy Kemp, of course, was injured, had 116 receiving yards. It's just pathetic how bad that Virginia offense was. Very bad taste in our mouth. Now, I wonder if people are going to come into the season thinking, hey, Brennan Armstrong, he did me so wrong last year. How can I possibly go back to him? And not realizing that there's a chance for a fresh start here. He is hopefully, knock on wood, going to be turned loose a little bit more. And we're going to see the return to 2021 Brennan Armstrong. I truly believe that is an option that's on the table and something that I'm really hopeful to see. Looking at the rest or who is returning for NC State at the running back spot, Jordan, who rushed for 544 yards a season ago, will get his shot. And Trent Penix, who I think could actually be a little bit of a sneakier DFS option. Not a consistent option, but somebody who can definitely produce. Came on there late in the season after missing games. In just 5 games, he caught 8 passes for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I'm pretty excited about what Trent Penix can possibly do with a full season under his belt. Certainly. You look at it, the wide receiver spot is going to be losing a lot of production there. Thayer Thomas, Devin Carter, combined 1,000 yards. They do have Porter Rooks coming back, 19 catches, 151 yards, and a touchdown. Keon Lassane, 31 catches, 342 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Somebody to really look at there. And Terrell Simmons, 3 catches, 79 yards, and a touchdown. So a lot to, kind of bring along there at the receiver position. They're a little green. Somebody's going to emerge. Lassane is certainly interesting. They do have DJ Collins, who transfers in from Clemson. Somebody to possibly keep an eye on. There's still a lot to, in terms of his upside and potential that hasn't been scratched yet. So I'm certainly intrigued by this NC State team, where I think a lot of people will, again, write them off, but I think there's value here, and we can definitely see that as the season goes along. We want to be in early on a group like this. All right, moving along to Louisville. Man, Louisville basketball. If you're a Louisville fan, or you went to Louisville, or my man Luke Glockenberg, you need a good football season. You need something to really wipe away the taste of that poor ass basketball season. Now, the Louisville team in the TBT with Russ Smith, they looked really good, like they'd make a run. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. So you really need something to turn around. Malik Cunningham, who we've relied on for so long, we're going to miss him. But looking at this, I think Louisville, they're going to be okay. You have Brock Doman, coming back into the mix there after he, played parts of 10 games last year, 998 yards, 4 touchdowns. Certainly the 6 interceptions leads you to believe the decision-making, not the best there. They do bring in Jack Plummer, and he is going to be the starting quarterback there. We've seen, or if you've looked at during the spring game practices, Doman has looked good. He's looked comfortable. I think if there's a situation where Plummer gets into trouble, or, he's just not able to, move this offense, I do think they won't be afraid to go to Doman. And I think at this point, he's pretty comfortable with being the backup, knowing that he could have the opportunity to come in. So we'll see what happens there with Jack Plummer at the helm. Plummer, of course, a couple years at Purdue, and then the California season there. 3,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Now, the Cal team was bad, but Plummer got it cooking, man. He was pretty solid. And he was really near min price. A lot are very, very cheap. And there were late slates that we did really well on with Plummer at the helm. That Cal team, again, bad, but DFS wise, they ended up being pretty decent more often than not. People didn't even realize. So that's who's going to be the quarterback for now. At running back, Jawar Jordan, Isaac Arendo. I think that the Louisville running game is a little bit lackluster in terms of at least names, but Jordan, he still can be really solid. Imagining him staying healthy for a full year. He did end the season pretty strong. And then you've got Correndo as probably the RB2 there. Again, nothing super exciting at the running back spot for me per se, but both of those guys are going to get majority of the work, at least early on. Now, the wide receiver spot is where it really kind of gets interesting. Let's pull this up here. 1,000-yard receiver last year in Tyler Hudson. Marshawn Ford, 400 yards. Amari Huggins-Bruce, 365 yards. Braden Smith, 215 yards. And then you got a bunch of guys from 75 to 100. So this isn't an offense under Malik Cunningham, or I should say, that really produced a ton at the receiver spot. But I think we're going to see a complete turnaround of that. And this wide receiver room is going to be a lot more viable from a fantasy perspective. I think Huggins-Bruce is an obvious candidate to explode. There were times last season where he looked really, really good. Obviously, Malik Cunningham's first preference whenever a play started to break down was to take off and run, and that really hurt them. Plummer won't be that the same way, and we're going to see an opportunity for Huggins-Bruce to really break out. Other guys coming in, Jaden Thompson, who's I saw today, let me double check here, that he's injured throughout the spring, but I believe he's cleared now. And that's big for Louisville with him being cleared. And then obviously they have Jimmy Callaway and then Jamari Thrash coming in. Jamari Thrash has the opportunity to be a big-time weapon here and a reliable receiver for Jack Plummer. Now, Thrash spent the last 4 seasons at Georgia State, but he turned in a 1,000-yard season last year, 1,122 yards to be exact, on 61 catches, 7 touchdowns, a go-to guy there. He showed flashes in 2021, 32 catches, 452 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So Thrash definitely, taking a step up. Obviously, this isn't Georgia State. This is Louisville in the ACC. But the Sun Belt, aka the Fun Belt, has a of businesses and teams there. So those numbers, anytime, whatever league you're in, 1,000+ yards is impressive. Certainly have to give him his flowers for that. So Thrash coming into it, definitely somebody who I think makes this program and this team much better. At the tight end spot, Josh Lifson, Dwayne Martin. I don't know. Des Melton, there is gone. There's not a lot of excitement for me at the tight end here. Let's pull this up. Trying to derive some fantasy value from this tight end spot. And I don't think so. Joey Gatewood does come in there, obviously, as a quarterback convert after time at Kentucky, Central Florida, Auburn. He's been around the block. Reading some beat reports that Gatewood maybe heavily involved. See what happens. A little bit leery of that one, but it certainly, could be somebody that comes into it super cheap. Hopefully DK doesn't misroster him as a quarterback and then he goes nuts, catches, 100+ yards and 2 touchdowns or something. But somebody to at least keep an eye on here and somebody that will be used to a degree there outside of Josh Lifson. Kevin Coleman, also a transfer, not Keon, but Kevin, who comes from Jackson State, that mass exodus from Jackson State. So a lot of new faces in the receiver room. And I had mentioned Jimmy Callaway earlier. Jimmy Callaway is somebody who will contribute to this offense immediately as well. As a transfer, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 transfer receivers who come in. Definitely a lot of new faces in a revitalized receiver room that I think will be quite good and something that we want to target liberally. I think it's going to be a really, really good offense for DFS purposes, considering this is another team that I think people will be a little bit turned off by and kind of write off, similar to NC State. Now, Callaway comes over from Tennessee after being pretty lower or lesser used, but he'll definitely factor in here. Don't be overlooking him too much either. All right, moving on to the next team here. Miami, the Hurricanes. Now, it was a very disappointing season from a fantasy perspective from Tyler Van Dyke. Coming into the season as a Seahawk fan, Tyler Van Dyke was the guy that I wanted to see do well enough to get drafted, and somebody who I was wanting the Seahawks to draft as their next quarterback. Now, he had an absolutely atrocious season, but I do think he'll get back on track. They have a freshman by the name of Emory Williams that's going to be there looming, pushing him. But this is Tyler Van Dyke's time to get back to business for this Miami team that has some weapons who are certainly going to be factors. The running game with Henry Parrish, the clear cut to me, RB1. Parrish is going to get a lot of work. He's certainly the guy. And when you look at Miami in terms of who's going to be a popular play, Henry Parrish looks to me like the guy that's going to be, rostered the most. I think people, again, will be a little bit gun shy of Tyler Van Dyke and rostering him, especially if the price is wrong early on. But this will be something I think we can kind of take advantage of. After this team went 5-7, a lot of people, again, in the kind of the theme of the ACC, will be writing them off to a degree. Parrish rushed for 616 yards. 4 touchdowns, caught 17 passes for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Had to have Jalen Knighton, who had 423 yards. He's out. They do have Ja'Cory Brown, who rushed for 221 yards a season ago as well, who is gone. So a lot of production gone. Henry Parrish, RB1 carries. One of the few situations that I think can be favorable for us as the running situation. Because Ja'Cory Brown, technically a backup quarterback, shouldn't be, the 4th on the team in rushing. So I'm looking at a 1,000-yard season for Parrish, assuming that he stays healthy. Wide receivers, we're looking at Isaiah Horton, Colby Young, Jacoby George, Xavier Restrepo, Rashad Smith, and Robbie Washington, a freshman. Frank Ladson also in the mix there. Another, Clemson name who will potentially be a factor. You look at it last year, Will Mallory was the top receiver statistically, 538 yards, 3 touchdowns. Colby Young, 367 yards. Latson, 298 yards. Rashad Smith, 308. And Xavier Restrepo, 240. I like Restrepo for a bit of he's a little bit older, but I like him for a semi-breakout. I think most people would look to a guy like Colby Young, and I think Rashad Smith is going to be a factor as well. So there's a lot of guys who I like. Pricing is going to be a factor here because if any of them come up over 5.5K, I don't have a lot of interest, but I do think we'll be able to take our shots with this Miami offense from a week-to-week basis. And I think it's, again, another group that's going to go overlooked. Not one that I'm going to be sitting here telling you, let's full stack Miami and ride off into the sunset, but there will be times where I'm probably talking about a 3.5K, Xavier Restrepo as somebody with touchdown equity, and maybe we're ahead of the industry on that one. All right. I kind of started from like highest or best relative term teams to lower end teams, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be lower end for DFS or fantasy purposes. It just means they're not going to be all that great. The Pittsburgh Panthers, they do have an opportunity to be good. They bring in from Boston College the jerk store, Phil Jerkovich. They also bring in my guy who I really like from Penn State, Christian Valou. I wanted him to get more of an opportunity at Penn State, but obviously it just wasn't meant to be. Clifford, they've got, just amazing talent at the quarterback spot, so you really just want to get a chance to play. I like Valou's chances to play here for Pitt. He's still young, technically a sophomore. If Jerk has any injury flare-ups, and he does have a vast injury history, Valou will get that shot. So keep an eye on him early on. I think there's a chance here, and this offense has really solid weapons, where Valou could be one of those sneakier, mid-season replacement level talents where people are just gun shy to use because they don't know anything about him. He can play. Watching a few times in games when he did take snaps, he looked really solid to me. I get these kind of random guys or players that, kind of have an affinity for. And he's one of those guys that maybe inexplicably I'm higher on than anyone else in the entire industry. And I'm okay with that. I really, really am. I like his chances there to at least play some games or some snaps. And especially if Pittsburgh has a game where it's just a total blow up and there's nothing happening on offense, they're just going to pull Jerkovich. Valou could be somebody who benefits from that. Let me pull up the Pittsburgh stat line. Now at running back, and they need a good quarterback, man, because they've brought in some names. Slovis last year, he just really couldn't get things going. They tried their hand with Nick Patty. They need some good production there. Now you're losing an absolute massive star at running back in Israel Abakanada. Almost 1,500 yards, 1,431 yards, 20 touchdowns, even caught 12 passes for good measure. That's a lot of production to be gone. However, Rodney Hammond back to assumedly take the RB1 role after rushing for 460 yards and 5 touchdowns. I like Hammond. I think he's pretty solid here in this spot. They do have Sibo Flemister as well, formerly rushing yards on 40 carries, YPC of 5.5, 2 touchdowns. Vincent Davis in his 52 carries for 274 yards, also out the door. So I think Flemister, sees a nice little spike in touches there and could be a potentially sneaky option there as well. They do bring in transfer from LSU, who's seemingly loaded at running back at all times, in Derek Davis. He will be a factor in the running game as well. So Pittsburgh did a nice job of kind of retooling there at the running back spot with so much production gone. Really for them, but I think they'll be okay at the running back spot, especially if the quarterback play is less than stellar. Now, they do return a handful of production at the receiver spots and at the tight end spots. Jared Wayne, 1,000 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. That didn't necessarily come as a surprise. We knew Jared Wayne could play, especially, with the talent kind of being a little bit green per se on last year's Pittsburgh team, especially after Jordan Addison, left for USC and to get that big paycheck. So that's a lot of yardage. Again, they're, back-to-back seasons, they're really retooling after losing their WR1, but they do have some nice, continuity within that receiver room. Now, obviously there's a new quarterbacks in play, but these receivers really do know each other and that's going to help at the end of the day. The two main primary options to know is my man, formerly of Maction, Kanata Mumfield, who came in last year and definitely played well as the WR2, 58 catches, 551 yards, and a touchdown. I'm looking for him as the guy to be the most likely to flirt with 1,000 yards. However, Bub Means is certainly a guy that we can't sleep on either, as the WR3, 27 catches, 401 yards, 2 touchdowns. Big playmaker. I like Mumfield maybe more as a PPR guy. Means more of the variance. In some weeks he'll have high ceiling games, some weeks he'll have lower floor games. But those two definitely the guys to kind of focus in on as your primary exposure if you're looking for stack options. They also bring in a transfer from Florida by the name of Dejon Reynolds, and he is certainly in the mix for early snaps and will be a factor. At the tight end spot, Gavin Bartholomew, after catching 21 passes, 283 yards, and two touchdowns returns. Kind of like Bartholomew as a guy that, especially if he's at near mid price, like kind of a specialty of mine, trying to find those cheaper tight ends with that touchdown equity, or if they have that, rapport with the quarterback. I'm trying to, get a touchdown, a couple catches, 50 plus yards out of these sub 4K tight ends. Bartholomew is somebody who we could possibly look at. They also do bring in another transfer there by the name of Malcolm Epps, who spent time at USC and Texas. Very, very talented, somebody who could be a factor as well. So this Pittsburgh offense, especially at the receiver spots and the tight end room, has a little bit of talent there and doesn't need to be completely written off like most people will do. And I really feel like the ACC is going to be a conference that clearly we're going to have on slates a lot as usual, but it's going to be really top heavy from the rest of the industry. We're going to see a lot of people, they're going to be pushing the Florida State guys. They're going to be pushing that North Carolina offense, Clemson as well. It's going to be a lot of that top heavy stuff. Maybe we see Riley Leonard end up way more popular than I expect way earlier. And then you're going to have that next tier, NC State, Louisville, Miami, Pitt, maybe even Wake Forest, where guys aren't really paying attention to them as much. They're maybe trying to get away with box score chasing. They're looking at last year. They're not factoring in coaching changes, player personnel changes. There's going to be a lot of expected output from these teams that I think people are just going to simply get lazy about and overlook. So I'm really going to be looking to these teams for a lot of leverage this season, and Pittsburgh is definitely one of those teams that I think we can get a lot of leverage from. And I do like several of their players. I don't have any trust in Phil Jerkovich at this point. I don't think any of us do, but he has the weapons to succeed here if he can stay healthy. If not, my man Christian Ballou is ready to take the reins. All right, moving on to the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. What are they doing at quarterback, man? Mitch Griffiths. They got Mariucci Santino. It's no Sam Hartman at the quarterback spot. At running back, they have Justice Ellison, Will Towns, Desmond Claiborne. Kind of not that excited there either. At the receiver spots, you have Jamal Banks, Taylor Morin's still there, and Donovan Green, which I think I saw. Let me double check here. I don't want to tell you guys the wrong thing. Ton of information going on here. Let's just double check here. Could have swore that I saw something here on Green. I don't know that he's going to be ready for the first part of the season here. By the way, next week, going to be talking heavily about season props. I've already got a lot in for Prize Picks. Going to be doing a lot of prop stuff and season bets for next week's show. By the way, what is up with this betting stuff going on? I think we all kind of thought that players betting on games was going to be something that happened. We saw Hunter Deckers and then Aaron Eulis. This might be just the beginning or the tip of the iceberg when it comes to players betting on games. Obviously not good. We don't want to continue to see that, but Jesus, this is the potential to be really, really bad. Borderline scary. So, all right. This is what I saw. Okay, I knew I saw it. Donovan Green went down in a non-contact injury late in practice Monday. Didn't practice today, being evaluated by doctors in about 48 hours. We'll know more in the coming days. Now, I did a quick look, and I didn't see any update there, but that's really, really rough news. If they don't have Donovan Green, obviously Sean Williams, Taylor Marin, and Jamal Banks become the primary guys to look at there. But geez, I don't have a lot of excitement for this Wake Forest team, and maybe this is the squad that I'm lower on than the rest of the field. I don't know, but it's just really difficult to get excited. Now, Griffiths last year, 348 yards, completed 72% of his passes, 5 touchdowns and an interception. Justice Ellison rushed for 700 yards, which was the team lead. But when you look at the receiving, A.T. Perry, 1,100 yards. Donovan Green, who, gosh, man, you don't want him to be unhealthy. Just feel for the kid. 650 yards last year. You go to the next tier, Jamal Banks, 42 catches, 636 yards, 9 touchdowns. Really good. Taylor Morin's 47 catches, 575 yards, 9 touchdowns. Really good. Has a WR4. Deshaun Williams, who has a ton of talent, 39 catches, 553 yards, and a touchdown. And then Blake Whiteheart, 24 catches, 295 yards, and 3 touchdowns. However, this is with a guy throwing the football by the name of Sam Hartman that I'm not thinking or feeling like Mitch Griffiths is going to necessarily look like early on. So I'm certainly lower on this team. I do think if Green is out, God, man, that would really, really suck if he is. There is some intrigue here for some of the cheaper guys just from a workload and snap standpoint. They also bring in a transfer from the Vols, Walker Morrell, who will get snaps, of course. But we could be looking at a situation where Jamal Banks or Sean Williams is getting a ton of targets. But we have to really see what Mitch Griffiths and this quarterback group is going to give us. So we'll monitor the Donovan Green news, of course, but damn, this Wake Forest squad not looking that great, eh? All right, moving right along here to the next team on our list, the Syracuse Orange. They have Garrett Schrader, who is a dual threat to the max. We know he can run the football. We know he can pass the football. Now, Sean Secker's not around anymore to run, but LaQuint Allen, who is on a ton of breakout lists, Juwan Price is there, certainly can play. So the running back room, nice and healthy. They have Aronde Gadsden back, who broke out in a huge way last year. Trevor Pina, Isaiah Jones, Damian Alford. The receiver room, certainly solid. Obviously, the Schrader-Gadsden combo should have a lot of popularity to it. We're going to see people rostering those two a lot. It's weird not seeing Sean Tucker there anymore, but the LaQuint Allen kid has the opportunity to really just burst out in a big, big way. You're replacing a lot of yards, 1,060 to be exact. Now, last year, after Tucker, Schrader rushed for 444 yards, LaQuint Allen 274, a YPC of 6.7. He also caught 17 passes for 117 yards. He has the opportunity to be really, really good. Juwan Price, 8 carries, 39 yards, wasn't a big factor. Allen might have a huge workload, and the fact that he's a pretty solid pass catcher as well really puts him high up on my list. And with a quarterback like Garrett Schrader, who we know he's going to run the football, he's going to, zero in on Gadsden, but there might be an opportunity for some Allen Schrader stacks that people aren't going to be looking at that could really jump off the page. And we could see a huge game where Allen scores twice on the ground, once in the air, and Schrader obviously does his thing and torches the slate as well. So I'm on board with the hype of LaQuint Allen a lot. Definitely feeling it. They even had LaQuint Allen throw a 33-yard touchdown pass last year, which was pretty neat. Just a big-time weapon. Now, Gadsden, I don't know. If anybody says they saw that breakout coming, I would say they're probably a liar. 61 catches, 969 yards, 6 touchdowns. The encore would be an obvious 1,000-yard season, but defenses won't get caught sleeping. They're going to know what to expect here. You also have the returning production from Damian Alford, 429 yards and 2 touchdowns. Trevor Pena, 22 catches for 203 yards. So there's some solid returners here. A lot of continuity within the offense. Isaiah Jones back, 4 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown in just 3 games played last year. So I think he'll take on a bigger role. Everybody familiar with themselves. Most of the transfers that Syracuse absorbed or the new faces are on either the offensive line or on defense. This offense certainly worth talking about. Defensively, it might be a little bit of a struggle at times, but they'll put some points up on the board, and that's really all we care about at the end of the day, unless you're my man Pete, who wants Syracuse to win games. Shout out to Pete Cole, by the way. Hope he is doing well. I haven't talked to him in a while, but that's my Syracuse fan convert to Miami, I guess. He's been all over the world, but Syracuse, he knows all about Syracuse. All right, Virginia Tech, moving right along here. The Hokies, a lot of new faces at the receiver position. They have Grant Wells there at quarterback. They have Kieran Drones as well. Nice, young, lots of upside from Baylor. Looked like he was going to be a guy that could possibly have taken the gig there at Baylor. Obviously didn't quite work out that way. The heir apparent to take over there, with Grant Wells. They have Malachi Thomas back at running back. Very tough runner. Somebody who can put up points in a hurry. They have a transfer from North Carolina A&T and Bashal Tootin. He has a solid running back as well. His group of wide receivers that you got to be really excited about for the future. Allie Jennings, who transfers from West Virginia to Old Dominion. Allie Jennings had a really big year. Now, the Old Dominion squad itself was a big-time disappointment, especially at the tight end position. I think ODU football, to me at least, I thought they were going to be a hell of a lot more of a DFS squad, somebody that we could use with regularity and somebody that would win games. They weren't a great squad for DFS purposes, and they didn't win games. They finished 3-9. They did have trouble at the quarterback position at times, although Hayden Wolf did turn in an okay season of 2,900 yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 INTs, and they had a running back in Blake Watson who rushed for over 900 yards. Now, where things got choppy was after Allie Jennings, there was just no consistency at the receiver and tight end position. Zach Kuntz, who I can admit, you know me, I'll own when I'm wrong and I'll talk about when I'm right, but I thought Zach Kuntz was going to be a fantastic tight end production-wise, and a lot of people in the industry did. Only was able to play 5 games, 12 catches, 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, just nothing. So really, and Blake Watson, the running back, ended up being the 3rd highest producer of receiving yards. Allie Jennings basically turned into a one-man show when it came to pass catchers, and he only was able to play in 9 games. 54 catches, 959 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Now he heads over to Virginia Tech, where he's certainly going to have that opportunity to be the WR1 here as well. They also bring in a very productive Jalen Lane. You may remember him from Middle Tennessee. Jalen Lane was a really sneaky DFS option last year for cheap. Middle Tennessee, we found they were on a lot of showdown slates, smaller slates, but really, really good across those 3 seasons with Middle 10, 124 catches, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's somebody that makes this offense pretty intriguing for sure. And then they also bring in yet another transfer by the name of Daquan Felton. So the 3 new faces who are likely going to be WR1, 2, and 3. Felton comes from Norfolk State, where he was productive. And then you have other guys like Stephen Gosnell, Tucker Holloway, and Dwayne Lofton. So the Virginia Tech offense itself, at quarterback, you're looking at pretty solid with Wells and Drones, rock solid at running back, and then a group of receivers that are are certainly going to be in play. Tight end, you have Nick Gallo, Daquan Wright, this Virginia Tech team. I don't know that they'll be a team that necessarily wins a lot of games in tough spots. They were 3-8 last year, but I think it's a team that is going to turn in some pretty solid stats. Grant Wells had a down year, 9 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, having to look over at his shoulder and see drones there. We did see Wells rush for 2 yards and 6 touchdowns, though. You see Holston gone, Sean King gone. So Malachi Thomas, I don't know. I'm really excited about Malachi Thomas. I think he's going to be an absolute bruiser of a player and put up some big stats. Nick Gallo last year, second on the team in yards at 256. So tight end 1 right there. Look for some much better production. They had Jadon Blue. They had Caleb Smith. Just really couldn't get anything going in that offense. I think they'll be improved with those new faces, especially with guys like Jalen Lane and Allen Jennings, as long as Wells or Drones, whoever it ends up being, can actually read defenses and throw the football with any consistency at all. Please, the word of the day, consistency. Let's show it. Georgia Tech, moving right along here. Georgia Tech, another team that's kind of exciting, right? They didn't win a lot, but they have some intrigue. They have Haynes King coming in, transferring in to play quarterback from Texas A&M. They still have, names that you'll recognize. Zach Gibson there, Zach Piron. So they're kind of solid at quarterback, honestly, if any of those guys step up. They do have Dante Smith returning. Trey Cooley, who transfers in conference from Louisville. You guys know I'm not crazy about that. Cooley, rock solid. Definitely forms a potential two-headed monster there at the running back position. At tight end, they welcome in transfer Brett Seither from Georgia. Not necessarily the tight end from Georgia you want, but still playing at Georgia, somebody to maybe look at. And then they bring in a myriad of transfers at the receiver position. Speaking of Chase Lane from Texas A&M, I'll get talk more about him in a second. Chase Lane, I like him a lot. I think he becomes, WR1, WR2 potential here in this offense after what we saw last year, assuming that he's completely healthy and good to go. Christian Leary transfers in from Alabama. Again, maybe not the name from Alabama you'd want, but good enough to go there. And Dom Blaylock, who redshirt junior, transfers in again from Georgia. So you've got, and he's a little bit more of a known commodity, so you have him at play as well. This is a group for Georgia Tech that I'm certainly not coming into the season with any expectations, and I don't think really anyone is. So it'll lead us to be pleasantly surprised if they're able to produce at all. They also have a Duquesne's transfer by the name of Abdul Jannah coming in. There are some guys on this team that I think can definitely turn in some solid production. It'll be laughable if anybody on this roster, especially early in the season, comes into the, $7K plus range. It'll be an easy write-off, but I think we'll see guys really come in super cheap that we can look at. And I think Dante Smith makes a ton of sense. Second on the team in rushing yards last year, 420. He also caught 19 passes, 425 yards. They don't have as a pass-catching running back. Gives me a lot of intrigue. Like I said, Nate McCollum gone. He led the team in receiving yards with 655. Pretty much all new faces at the receiver spot, so we'll get a fresh start there and new faces at quarterback as well, unless Zach Gibson or Zach Piron win the job. And let me tell you, neither of those guys looked all that great last year, both under 60% completion rate. Nothing to get too excited about there. This offense, really for me, Dante Smith or Trey Cooley. And then some of those wide receivers I think will emerge at some point, especially if Haynes King is the one to get the job. All right, Boston College, no jerk store. He's off. We know he's transferred to Pitt. They do have Emmett Moorhead, who has all the potential in the world at quarterback. Curious to see how things will pan out for him early. Pat Garwell returns as the upperclassman RB1. Alex Broom, someone to keep an eye on. And then Kyle Robichaud, checks in, or transfers in, I should say, from Western Kentucky. Somebody who had his moments at WKU, but honestly not that exciting of a player. At tight end, George DeCox, I think he is rock solid, somebody we can definitely look at. They have Dino Tomlin, Joseph Griffin, and Tajee Johnson at wide receiver, and Jaden Skeet, that's a fun name to say, as a freshman. And they bring in everything type of player at wide receiver, Ryan O'Keefe, who was at Central Florida and just a complete stud, a machine of a player during his time at UCF. Statistically speaking, they used him in a myriad of ways, running the football, out of the flat, out of the slot. They used him everywhere and anything you can think of. His last 2 seasons for UCF are as follows. 2021, 84 catches, 812 yards, 7 touchdowns, also rushed 16 times, 274 yards, carry the 1, move the decimal. That's a 17.1 YPC and a touchdown. He also had a big season that year. Not so big last year, however, still caught 73 passes for 725 yards and 5 touchdowns. And he also carried the rock 23 times, 22 yards. The YPC, an okay 9.7. It's not 17.1, 9.7. We'll take it. Certainly a versatile weapon. Boston College needs to just feed him early and often. We saw with our guy Flowers on a bad Boston College team. They can still churn out productive DFS options. I don't love this Boston College team at all. I'm really not seeing a lot of wins here, but again, we don't care about that. When you look at what Emmett Morehead did last year, 1,300 yards in relief of 10 games, about a 60% completion rate, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It was comparable to what Phil did. Certainly feel like he could actually be, people think, especially over and over again. Everybody in the building and on defense knew it, and they still were able to get him the rock. 78 catches, 1,077 yards, 12 touchdowns. And then you go down, Jalen Gill, 27, 388. George DeCox, 26, 256, and 1. And then Pat Garwa, the running back, 29 catches, 241 yards. So it literally was feed Zay Flowers repeatedly. They also gave Zay 12 carries for 40 yards. So that tells us that they're going to be willing to give their wide receivers carries if they are a versatile enough weapon, and Ryan O'Keefe certainly is, and he's shown over the course of his career he can handle a lot of touches. So I think we're looking at a situation here where, yes, it's a bad team, but we don't want to ignore Ryan O'Keefe, especially if they price him like early season Zay Flowers, which was ludicrous, 5'5", 6K, 6'5". It took a long time for them to price Zay Flowers accordingly, and if they do that same thing with Griff or O'Keefe, I'm not going to hesitate. He's going to be in every single lineup week after week in my main. I don't care who BC plays. I don't care how bad they are. O'Keefe's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. So that's pretty much my Boston College spiel for you at this moment in time. Moving on, the last team here, the Virginia Cavaliers. Man, I hate Virginia for ruining Brennan Armstrong. I really hate them for it. They have the Monmouth transfer in Tony Muskett. They have Jay Woolfolk back. I don't know. The running game on paper looks good. The quarterback situation, I'm not that hyped. Some veteran group at running back, and I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of those guys. They're going to be running the ball a lot. At wide receiver, you don't have the sexy names that you're accustomed to seeing. You have a couple freshmen by the name of Titus Ivy, Jaden Gibson. Then you have Malachi Fields, Dernick Starling, and Dakota Twitty. They have a lot of cool, fun names on this team. The main receiver that you're going to recognize or know of is Northwestern transfer Malik Washington, somebody that I did like last year. You guys know my affinity, not as much anymore after everything that's happened, but I had an affinity for Northwestern wide receivers last year. Malik Washington, definitely somebody that I like. He will certainly be fed in this offense. Not as much. I don't know who else they would be looking to get the ball to. Everybody will expect them to run and run often with Pace, Jones, the Hollins group, but they're going to have to eventually throw the ball. We'll see if the Tony Muskett kid can get it done. But this Virginia team looks real bad. real bad. Looking at Tony Muskett's Monmouth numbers, let's try to get the Virginia fans in the stands excited. 8 games at quarterback for Monmouth, 143 for 223, almost 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Also rushed for 203 yards and 1 touchdown. In a game against Fordham, his season high of 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also threw for 161 yards and 3 touchdowns while rushing for 78 against Villanova. Okay. It's going to be bad, folks. If you're a Virginia fan, it's going to be bad. But you're in luck. If you're a Virginia fan, basketball season is going to be phenomenal because everybody's sleeping on the basketball version of the Virginia Cavs is being slept on. We are going to, not only am I, but we are going to make a lot of money betting Virginia this year. But their football team, it's rough. It's rough. If you're ever rostering anyone from this team, it's the running backs, but I think that we're going to see some cannibalization here with the touches. Kobe Pace should get a decent amount of work, but Paris Jones will be there and Mike Hollins pilfering touchdowns. It's all bad. It is all bad. I try to find something good with each of the teams that we're previewing, and I think I've done a pretty good job of at least turning in 1 to 2 options that we can look at, whether you're drafting a dynasty or season-long league for college football or just looking to bet props from a team or looking for DFS sneaks. I feel like I've given you somebody from Georgia Tech, somebody from Boston College, somebody from Wake Forest, right? It's really hard to do that for Virginia. This is a team that I'm not a fan of. And I never want to just write off a team, for the season or anything like that, but it's going to be really hard for me to be talking about rostering Virginia guys with any sincerity, unless they're priced super cheap. If they come into it and they're priced so awful and cheap that we can get there based on volume, then that'll be a different conversation. But if they're priced up there with other guys who are just better situations, it's borderline foolish to even roster any of them. So we'll see what happens there. That will wrap up the ACC preview, and that wraps up all of the conference breakdowns. We've had a great summer. We've talked all about the transfer portal from college basketball, conference previews, top 25 rankings there, to college football, transfer portal, top 25 rankings, conference previews. Feel pretty good. You can go back and check on the FTN Network's YouTube channel under playlist. If you check out the Super Show, you can not only revisit on-demand shows of the CFB version of the Super Show, but also the CBB Super Show on demand. Got both banners there. We're ready. We're like Superman, from one show to the other. Lots of cool, great stuff going on. I'm super jacked. We will transition the show. This next week will likely be the last Wednesday show, and then we'll transition to Thursday, which will start being a co-hosted show by either Jake Kuchek, my normal co-host on the Thursday edition of the Super Show, or a special guest that will work through the slate with me. What will happen this year is we will have the Thursday night show to break down the Saturday main slate. Then I'll be on air Saturday morning, about an hour and a half before lock, to rehash any, core plays, any changes in my thought process, and any breaking news, relevant rumors, anything we need to take a look at. And that's how we'll roll for a few weeks until we start getting into action slates during the week. And then we'll start having write-ups and shows, multiple times a week, right as the week 3, week 4 turn happens. And we're going to be doing a lot of content, not only for the FTN daily side, but FTN bets as well. And we have a lot of smart guys in the college football industry and football in general that are very, very good on the betting side that we're going to have to do some work with, but they'll have content on FTN bets as well. Super excited for this season. I truly believe it's going to be the best one yet. And for those of you who have been asking for like projections and stuff like that, for college basketball this season, getting dangerously close to finally having that become a reality. So appreciate everybody who continues to support the Super Show and the FTN Network as a whole. Make sure you guys hit the like button if you're watching this live or on demand. Giving us that interaction, whether you're on Twitter or on YouTube, is much appreciated. It helps the show a tremendous amount. Appreciate it. See you guys next week for another edition of the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, and I'll see you guys later.